Hello, everybody. My name is Christina. I work at the UCLA Career Center. Welcome to the Pre-Health Application Week, last day of the Pre-Health Application Week. Our first program today is What's Your Story? Writing a Great Personal Statement. And I will stop my screen share and I will invite Emily and Grace to take over. So let me stop my share and feel free to take it over.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. We're so excited to be here and talk about how to write a good personal statement. We'll start with some introductions. My name's Grace. I'm a fourth year human biology and society major. Used to be pre-med, not anymore, but I know a little bit about, the class, how that works classes wise. And I've been working for the Writing Center for 3 years now.
And I'm Emily. I'm currently a third year psychobio major. I also used to be pre-med, but not anymore. So I also have some kind of familiarity with those classes and things like that. And I've been working with a lot of students this week in my appointments as a PLF on medical school applications. So yeah. So the first thing that we wanted to go over a little bit about writing applications for graduate programs is who exactly will be reviewing your experiences and your applications, because we feel like this is something that a lot of people actually aren't really aware of, whether it's going to be faculty or doctors or even students reviewing your application. So we found this bit on the UCLA Medical School's website about who exactly makes up the admissions committees. And it says that membership shall be diverse and have faculty representation from all fields, and that the members of the admissions committee will have successfully completed at least the first year coursework of medical school. So you could have students reviewing your applications and interviewing you and things like that, but they will have successfully completed the first year, but they could not necessarily be in the profession that you are hoping to apply for. So that's definitely something to think about when you're thinking about what you might want to write about, that not all of your readers will be physicians or people in the field that you're particularly applying for. So that can be something to keep in mind when you're thinking about things like terminology or experiences that you talk about, or just making assumptions that your reader knows exactly what you're talking about when they might not. And we also wanted to talk about how application readers view your application. And typically they're looking across all of your application materials holistically. So they look at your activities section, your personal statement, GPA, MCAT or GRE score, and your letters of rec all at once. And usually one or two people will be looking over those things. So that's something important to keep in mind to avoid things like repetition or some things that you feel you need to include in your personal statement because they're in your activities section, but they don't necessarily need to be repeated because you already have those things.
Yeah, so next we're going to talk a little bit about what actually is a personal statement and what kind of components make up the personal statement. So usually, a personal statement is composed of some sort of storytelling of experiences that are related to who you are, your life story, and how they shaped your interest in the field. So it's not just kind of like random aimless storytelling. Obviously, it is focused on why you want to, go to med school or go to PA school or go to dental school or whatever kind of pre-health program you're looking into. And the real point is to kind of personalize your application and humanize it almost, right? So, they get to look at like everything like your resume and your transcript and see parts of you in that way, but they don't really get to meet you as a person. And so this is kind of, a stand-in for that essentially. And so ideally you would want to engage the reader with your personal statement and use a writing style that is fresh and active, especially, trying to not make it sound too academic in the sense that like you want your personal voice as a writer and as a person to come out in this piece of writing. You also want to find some sort of unifying theme and try to establish that very clearly in your essay. And every paragraph should emphasize or relate to this theme in some way. And so the theme could be something like, you want to emphasize a certain like personal characteristic that you have that you feel like would make you a really good applicant, or just kind of, like maybe centering it around a certain story that shaped your interest in applying to one of these programs. Also, as with any essay, the first paragraph is really key for setting the tone and drawing the reader in. I like to recommend that people start with an anecdote of some sort to kind of like, set the scene for what you're going to talk about and why you're interested in this application. And then also do your research on the schools that you're applying to. And obviously when you're writing your applications, you're probably, or your essays, you're definitely going to have like kind of like a big draft, right? That you're submitting to a bunch of schools that you will tweak and personalize for each school that you send it to. You're not necessarily writing an entirely new essay for every single school you apply to. That would be crazy. But like making sure that you're personalizing those essays to those schools. So like what sets this particular program apart? Is it the way that they teach their classes? Is it the kind of like clinical experience that you're going to get while you're in the program? Is it something about the community of students that you see as being really appealing to you? So be as specific as possible when you're outlining your goals and things like that.
So now we're going to go into some things that you might want to avoid when writing your personal statement. So the first thing would be just listing or telling stories about all of the points that can be found in your resume or CV or activity section. So just going through all 15 of the activities can get really constraining, especially when you have only 5,300 characters, for example, which is pretty typical of a lot of applications. And those things can be found in your resume for a reason, and they're going to be evaluated holistically. And your personal statement is really a time for you to talk a little bit more personally, one-on-one, like you're talking to an admissions officer about why you think that you should be admitted into their school. And so it gives you a chance to show a little bit more about your personality, and crowding out those parts of your personality and your story with just activities being listed can definitely be something that puts you at a disadvantage. And the second thing we wanted to talk about is centering your essay around wanting to help people. And I'm sure this is all something that you all have considered in your pursuit of an advanced healthcare degree, but wanting to help people is definitely not super specific. So like we were saying about honing in on something specific about the school that you want to emphasize in your application, centering in on a very specific reason why you want to pursue this field in general is also very important to admissions officers and can help create that unifying theme in your personal statement. And the third thing is something that is not necessarily talked about as much, but it's dissing other health professions, whether overtly or not. But this is something that you definitely want to avoid, because applying to these advanced healthcare degree programs is a big privilege that not everybody has. And it shows that when you diss other health professions, it just shows that you don't necessarily have a level of respect for them. And healthcare is something that is very community-based and very team-oriented. And so you want to be able to distinguish why you want to be this specific role in the healthcare system while also supporting other people who choose other roles. And then the fourth thing is using vague, generalized language when discussing the program you're applying to. And this kind of goes back to that idea about specificity, but just saying that I love the program's community is something that you could copy and paste across many different applications, and your readers might be able to pick up on that. So using very specific examples and language when discussing your programs is something really beneficial. Maybe either pointing to a class or a faculty member or something really specific about the program is definitely something important. And then another thing to avoid is just generally passive voice, which is something that we just want to avoid in writing in general. And this is where your sentence structure makes your writing come across as less active, and it reads a little bit more like you are not at the forefront of what you're discussing. So that's something that you can definitely have a really quick fix for and something to avoid.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to address something in the chat, which is that Amir asked, what do you mean by not centering the essay on helping people? What's an example of something specific for the personal statement? Part of why we put that bullet point in there is because as PLFs, we see a ton of personal statements, and that's a pretty common cliche, right? Like a lot of people will come in and say, I want to go to med school because I want to help people. Well, that's kind of implied, right? Like, of course, you want to help people because that is what the medical profession, entails. And also you could help people in any other, in any other kind of career path you choose. It doesn't necessarily mean that like because you're going to med school, that's the only profession that you help people in, right? So you want to make that more specific to your own goals. So maybe like, you want to like say that your passion is kind of like equity and access to healthcare. You want to help people, have like equal representation in healthcare or equal access to healthcare, making it more specific in that way. Or even just, kind of like telling some sort of personal anecdote about like maybe there was a situation where like you were interacting with the healthcare system and you felt like the people that were supposed to be supporting you, the doctors, the nurses, et cetera, were not giving you the support that you needed. And so how did that show you what that means to you? What does it mean to kind of like give a patient or somebody who's interacting with the system support? Does that make sense? Hopefully that clarifies a little bit. And this is something that we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session. And so if you have questions more specifically about the essay that you're writing and your themes, we can talk about that then. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's move on. So another thing that we want to address is the fact that writing is a psychological practice, right? Especially the idea of writing a personal statement is very, very difficult because we're not used to kind of having to condense our lives down into, a 5,000 character essay, right? That is not something that we do regularly. And especially with an essay that is this, important to your career path, it can be really difficult to just kind of actually sit down and start writing the thing because, like there's a lot of pressure that's associated with this specific essay. And like the second bullet point says, the biggest obstacle is often this imposed pressure, whether it be from ourselves or the stakes of what we're writing for. Maybe you have a lot of pressure from your family to go to do this program or, from your community or something like that. There's just a lot of stressors related to applying to grad school that kind of get wrapped up in this personal statement. And I think that it can feel really high stakes. And sometimes those writing blocks or procrastinations are just a result of anxiety about writing. Maybe you feel like you aren't very confident in like, being able to sum yourself up in an essay like this. So one way to work through this is there's actually, this bullet details 2 points. One way to work through this is to free write. So just kind of sitting down and, setting a timer for like 10 minutes or something and just writing down everything that you can think of that you would want somebody to know about you that's outside of, your other application materials, like your resume and stuff like that. Just giving yourself kind of like the freedom to kind of brain dump, just kind of think about the things that you're interested in, think about the things that you want people to know about you, write those down without even, trying to structure it as an essay or something. Sometimes, it can help to kind of release yourself from the pressure of writing in this format and then, generate ideas that way. And the other way to kind of kickstart your writing process is to create an outline. We'll talk about how to do that right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Grace said about writing being so psychological. And I think something important to consider is that all of you are just amazing for even just getting to this point. And even though it may seem super, super stressful right now, and I totally understand that this time of year is super crazy for all those pre-health applications for that reason, just take a moment to be proud of everything that you've achieved. It can also be hard when all of your peers are writing personal statements as well, and you're reading through all of those and comparing yourselves to them. But your personal statement is personal for a reason, and it's to show everything that you've done. And it's not necessarily to, be something that you're going to be really harshly judged on, but it's an opportunity for you to talk a little bit more personally about your passions that got you here. So just take a moment and just be proud of yourselves for showing up today, but also showing up for yourself for the last 4 years to getting to this point. So onto outlining. This is an example of what we might do in regular outlining, where you basically would just write out kind of a summary of your story or some of the things that you want to incorporate. And if you don't necessarily want to write out a full summary, you can just look over your activities list after you've filled that out and maybe try and pick a couple activities that you feel are really impactful to you. And maybe just start thinking about some of the themes that tie all of your activities together, because usually some of your activities will have some common underlying interests throughout them, and connect those themes back to those activities, but also the broader theme of your life that led you to it before college or before high school or growing up or anything like that. And then within that summary, find pockets where you can fit in a bigger discussion of the activities you've done and think of ways that you might be able to piece all of those together.
So some people don't think that linearly. I know I can't sit down and like I have trouble kind of, writing out the outline for an essay exactly as I want it to be written. So if you are the kind of person who has trouble with structuring their ideas in order or all at once, a puzzle outline can actually be a really helpful strategy to combat that. So kind of, going back to kind of like this brain dump, or, like giving yourself time to kind of brainstorm in that way, you can come up with separate stories, ideas, themes, activities, things that you feel like don't feel very related, and kind of just write little vignettes about them. So, maybe like write a paragraph about like what you would say about that specific experience or that specific theme. And then once you have a bunch of these different little blurbs, you can kind of piece them together like a puzzle. So looking at like where the common ideas are connecting, see if they're associated with each other in some way, or if you can identify common themes between them. And so essentially, like, I don't know if anybody knows what like a reverse outline is, but instead of, like a reverse outline, a traditional reverse outline is just sitting down and writing everything that you want to write and then going back and restructuring it. It does seem like a little bit difficult to do that with something like this because you might not know exactly what you want to say. There might be too many ideas that you feel like you can't fit in. So instead, kind of chunking it into little tiny paragraphs or segments, and then taking those segments and kind of trying to fit them together like a puzzle.
Yeah, adding on to that about puzzle outlines, they can be super great if you're struggling with starting to write, but it's also something to keep in mind that it kind of lends itself to not being super specific at times. And that's something that we have emphasized a lot throughout this presentation, but something that we see a lot in different personal statements that's really important, that idea of specificity. So if you are going to go through the perspective of a puzzle outline, maybe just keep that in the back of your mind as something that's really important that you want to look over after you're done. And then onto structuring your personal statement. After you have your outline, maybe where do you want to put those things? Or even after you've written your whole personal statement, you feel like things could be in different orders. So there are two main ways to structure a personal statement, which is by theme and chronologically. And we would probably recommend using a thematic structure just because that's something that your admissions committees want to see, those themes throughout your life. And that means that each segment of your personal statement revolves around a specific theme. For example, like health equity. It incorporates experiences not in the order that they happen, but in an order that supports each theme. For example, like coming into it and then going into deeper research or patient care experiences and things like that. And it's also important to realize that these two ways to structure your personal statement can definitely have overlap because you can definitely go into something a lot deeper chronologically, of course, but it's important to recognize that those themes are more important than that chronological order of having birth to present in 5,000 characters. That can also be very overwhelming to write all of that and go from point A to point B to point C. But we want to emphasize the idea of those themes in those structures.
Yeah, and so to kind of build on this, because I think that this can be something that's difficult to understand just because this is being talked about very abstractly. So an example of, I think, like a situation where maybe you could pull off a chronological structure is if maybe, and this is kind of an extreme example, but maybe you had a major health crisis, during your undergraduate experience. And because of that health crisis, you switched your major from something humanities to something STEM because you decided at that point you wanted to be a doctor because of what you've been through, right? When you have some sort of major life shift like that, it kind of is important to tell your story chronologically because the timing matters, right? Like this event that punctuated your undergraduate experience caused you to go down this path, right? But for most of us, it's a little bit less dramatic than that, right? It's a little bit more like, I just think I'm interested in this, and I kept exploring things until I really solidified for myself that I was interested in this, and so a thematic organization would kind of, take a specific theme. Say you want to emphasize the fact that you're a great collaborator or you're really good at teamwork or something like that. You can tell a story about, like an anecdote about that kind of teamwork, and then recount what experiences that you've had that have kind of helped you develop this skill. And they don't necessarily have to be in chronological order. Maybe, you started an experience like in your last year of college that you felt like was could be the basis for kind of where you start talking about how you developed the skill. And then you can jump back to experiences that you've had prior to that helped you build on those skills as well. Hopefully that makes sense. I think I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah. And this kind of thing becomes more clear when you start actually writing your personal statement. It is a little bit difficult, again, to kind of talk about it in a vacuum. So the last thing that we're going to do is we have a little activity. We have some sample personal statements because I know that people, that's helpful to people and people want to see examples of that. So I'm going to pause my screen sharing just really quickly so that I can drop the link to this in the chat. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen at this point. So I put in the chat this link, and it has 2 sample personal statements, examples 1 and examples 2. And we have about 20 minutes to do this. So we'll have plenty of time to have you guys read through these, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. We'll start with example 1, if you want to take 5 minutes maybe to read through this first example. And then we'll answer some of these questions about, what makes this a strong statement and how does the author structure their essay. Okay, does anybody feel like they need more time to look at this personal statement? I'm going to assume that silence means no. Okay, awesome. So some of the questions, I mean, we don't have to focus specifically on these questions, but some of the questions that we had are what makes these strong, or what makes this a strong statement, and how does the author structure their essay? So we can start there, or if anybody has other insights that they'd like to volunteer, feel free to either, like jump in and unmute yourself or put it in the chat what you're thinking about these questions. I would say one thing that I noticed when I was reading through this first one is that it almost appears to have a chronological structure to it. We can't really tell, right? We don't know exactly whether this is like the exact path that that person took. Like we don't know in what order they had these experiences, but they were able to structure it so that it seems like one thing led to another, Should we mention a university's name in the personal statement if we are applying to multiple schools? Do you mean like I'm not 100% sure about how like you submit your essays. Like I don't know if it's like, when you apply to college, like you have a portal where you submit your essay to like every school, or is it do you send them individually? Okay, yeah, dissing physical therapy, right? Like something that we talked about is kind of like, can you be respectful about like, the professions that you didn't choose to pursue? Because you don't know, a physical therapist might be reading your personal statement and that would not come off as, sensitive, right? Yeah. Okay, it's a centralized application portal. Yeah, so I mean, in that case, you probably don't want to say, like if you're applying to multiple schools with the same exact essay, you're not gonna, mention a specific school, right? I'm not sure exactly what this essay was meant for, but there's a pretty easy way to kind of generalize at the end and just, and like cutting out this segment, and kind of just focusing on like more generally like what the kind of programs that you're applying to will help you do. And then when you send in your secondaries or your supplementals or whatever they're called, that's when you'll kind of like include that more specific information about the program.
And going back to that discussion about physical therapy being really dissed in this personal statement, I think it's a really good learning point because we don't necessarily see why the author is interested in healthcare administration as much as we would if they had left out that part and maybe just rephrased the things that they were looking for. So that's something to think about. You can keep in some of those same sentiments. Like if you had an experience that made you not want to be a certain role, you can still talk about that as long as it's pretty short and concise, still leaves room for other things and is not an attack on people in that profession. So maybe just think, if I were somebody in that profession reading this, would I be offended? And if the answer is yes, it is probably likely that you wouldn't want to include it.
Mm-hmm. So Kennedy in the chat says, I also think that the first author's personal statement seemed like a list of their resume and activities. I would agree. I think that there's not a ton of integration between these different activities. And I don't think that this is necessarily like a bad example of a personal statement, but like there are ways that you can kind of, include more anecdotes or like structure it in a different way so that it doesn't feel like more of like a list, like you said. Yeah. I also think that this example talks about wanting to help people, but in a specific way, right? So this is kind of what we were touching on earlier. It doesn't just say like, oh, I want to help people as a profession. I like to help people. It says I want to help people specifically in preventative healthcare, because I know that this is an area that like would prevent health issues down the line. And so this is how I can help somebody, right? Okay, any other comments about this one before we move on to looking at the next one? Okay, so let's take another 4-ish minutes to look at the next one. And then at 12:40, we'll discuss what you guys think about that one. Take one more minute. Okay, in the interest of time, let's come back together and discuss this one. So again, any impressions about this one, about its structure, about the content of it, or also comparing it to the last one? Did you like one of them better? Did you like this one better? Any impressions that people have? You like the second one better as it seemed more personal. Yeah, I think that this was also something that I picked up on, is that the second one seems more focused on an anecdote, right? Like, whereas the first one feels more like it's just kind of taking somebody through their journey, how they decided why they wanted to do what they want to do. Are there any specific aspects of this second one that make it feel more personal? I think even if nobody has an answer to that, it's helpful to think about that just so that you can kind of implement that in your own writing. So thinking about like what specific techniques does this author use that you feel like personalizes it, and how you can translate that to your own writing. Any other observations about this second one? Or alternatively, oh, sorry, somebody's gonna say something. Or maybe not. Alternatively, we could talk about if you had to pick one of these candidates to admit, who would you pick? The second one. Okay, I'm getting a couple responses that people would pick the second one. Someone says that they would pick the second one because it has a more cohesive theme, and I would definitely agree. It's okay. Yeah, definitely. Okay. It's you know, lunchtime. I think people are a little, I'm like, maybe people haven't had their lunch yet. It's okay. We can be done with talking about these. But hopefully, you know, looking at these examples gives you a better idea. And I will just say that like neither of these, like the point is not to look at these and be like, oh, one of these is the right example and one of these is the wrong example, or like one of these would definitely get admitted and one definitely wouldn't. They're both equally, you know, like have strengths and have weaknesses. And so hopefully like reading through these can kind of give you an idea of like, you know, the nuance in like in what looks good and what doesn't look quite as good in a personal statement, and help you to kind of apply those own like those logics to your own writing. Do you have anything else to add, Emily?
Yeah, just going off of that, I wanted to talk about maybe some of the strengths and weaknesses of the second one, just so maybe people can get an idea of what some of the weaknesses might be, given that this is a very strong personal statement. So I think something that this personal statement did really well was talking about what made them choose public health. And that's really something that the whole entire essay is focused on, just why public health. And I think they did a really good job also talking about not wanting to go to medical school and writing that in not only a very respectful way, but also a very personable way, by adding in like a little joke, although my short stint in biology would not lead to a career in cancer cures. I thought that was very good. That was like a personable aspect that the author added in. And then in terms of weaknesses, I think because we have a lot of kind of abstract language here, it would have been really beneficial if the author added in maybe some of those experiences they had in college that they drew on for some of the reasons why they wanted to pursue public health, or some things that they've already done, because this doesn't have any concrete examples whatsoever. And while that does allow the author to go into a little bit more personal aspect, it would be helpful to have some of those aspects that the first personal statement had.
Yeah, definitely. And then to address Tamir's question in the chat, I noticed that they both focus on public health accessibility. Would you say that that's a necessary component for every essay? No is the answer. I was also noticing that both of these, I don't know why both of these are public health personal statements. They might be like MPH program personal statements. So, you know, if you're applying to a program that's not a public health focus, you know, the topics might be different, but there is no hard and fast rule about like what you should and shouldn't put in your essays. I think that you want to talk about like, you know, if health accessibility and health equity is something that you're passionate about and it like relates to the program that you're applying to, then by all means, of course, like write about that. But, you know, if that's not something that you're focused on as much, then it's gonna, you know, invariably, if you write about something that you're not very passionate about, it will come off, you know, the reader will be able to tell. Like, you can't really hide from the reader that like you don't really care about something that you're writing about, or not even that you don't care, but like this is not your primary interest, right? So just pick, like, it doesn't necessarily matter what exactly you write about, just making sure that you're picking things that you're passionate about and that you feel like you can write about in a very like authentic way. Yeah. Okay. If there are no other questions, we can stop the presentation here, and we have until 1 p.m. to do some Q&A. We were going to have each of us be in a breakout room so that, you know, if you have like, you know, more specific questions about your personal statement, you can ask us that, or if you have more generalized questions, those can also happen. But we will, let me just try to set these up really quick. I'm going to open these rooms. Emily is going to be in the first room and I'll be in the second room. So feel free to, if you've gotten what you need to, feel free to leave. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And if not, if you have other questions for us, please join the breakout rooms. And then, yes, we will share the slides after the presentation.
I will stop the recording now, so you guys can feel free to join the breakout rooms.